Hi folks, in this video I'd like to go over some of the main points from the groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals by Kant. For my Marywood students, there will be a link underneath the link for this video that will have reading questions. The reading questions are just that, reading questions. You can go along with those while you watch the video, but you particularly should go along with the reading questions while you're reading. And I would greatly suggest and promote the idea of using reading questions as a way to sort of get centered in on a reading if you're unfamiliar with the reading. So let's get started. I'll share the screen with you. So here we are. We're going to look at some text of an excerpt from Kant's famous work, one of his famous works on morality. Kant is a deontologist. Deontology is the moral category, the moral theoretical category that contains normative moral theories, that is, moral theories that tell us how we should act when we want to act morally. Deontology or deontological theories, the word deontology comes from the word deon, Greek for duty. So it's the study of duty, or you can think of the term duty ethics. So in direct contradistinction between or from utilitarianism and consequentialism. Consequentialism would be the category that contains utilitarianism, just as deontology would be the area that contains Kantian ethics. It would also contain a sort of religious-based, perhaps 10 Commandments kind of ethics. So in deontology, it's all about following the rule, and by following the rule, you're doing your duty, and that's what determines morality. Whereas in consequentialism, the whole way of determining whether an act is right or not, ethically, morally, we use the terms, I'm going to use the terms synonymously, even though there's some little bit different meaning. In consequentialism, the way you ethically reason is to look at the outcomes of actions and whether the outcomes are good or bad. And the better the outcome, the better the action. So in utilitarianism, it's about happiness or flourishing or any number of things in place of utility. So whatever utility is defined as in a utilitarian theory, then that's what the good is that should be promoted. So for John Stuart Mill's kind of utilitarianism, it's all about promoting or maximizing happiness and decreasing unhappiness. So maximize pleasure, minimize pain sometimes in situations. For instance, in healthcare situations, maybe there is no pleasure to be had, so it's all about just minimizing pain. That's still utilitarianism, okay? So the two moral theories are very different from each other, and oftentimes folks that are Kantian ethicists will argue with folks who are utilitarians, and Mill was very aware of Kant and was adamantly opposed to Kant's way of doing ethics. So let's get an idea here of what Kant had in mind. For Kant, it all starts with a good will. Now, when we talk about a will with Kant, we're talking about, let's see, this could get tedious. Actually, I think that could get tedious. So let me see, how do I go back? Well, anyway, I'm going to do this. So a will, when Kant talks about a will, he's talking about a sort of internal chooser. He's talking about a similar kind of thing where when we talk about, oh, I just didn't have the will to not do this, or I just didn't have the will to continue. He's talking about a kind of a internal choice. He's not talking, when he talks about a good will, it's two words. He's not talking about goodwill as in wishing someone well. So it's important to make that distinction because he uses the term a lot, a goodwill. So I think that the underline may slow me down a little bit. So I'm going to use this little funny red thing here. It is impossible, Kant says, to think of anything at all in the world, or even beyond it, that could be considered good without limitation except a good will. Okay, now that has to sink in a little bit. Maybe back up the video, think about it again. The only thing that's good is a will that is good. Okay, that's the only, I mean, that's the beginning and end of what morality is about, is having a will that is good. Now, how does a will become good? That's what this is all about. That's what Kant was talking about. But first, he has to make it clear what he means by this. So there are other things that humans have. Oh, let's see. Undo. There we go. Okay. Other faculties that people have. We have understanding, we have wit, we have judgment. These are traits, characteristics of people, just like we have a will. This is how this was the state of psychology at the time. So this is what they talked about. Understanding, wit, judgment, and such talents of the mind. So this is sort of a thing he calls talents of the mind, may be called, whatever they may be called, or courage, resolution, etc., qualities of temperament. Okay, he's just giving little categorical names for each of these. Undoubtedly, all these things are good and desirable, but they can also be extremely evil and harmful if the will, which is to make use of these gifts of nature, is not good. It's the same with gifts of fortune. So what life gives us, power, riches, honor, etc., health, all these can be good and very, I mean, in a sense, they can be good. They're good for well-being, maybe even necessary for happiness. But without a will that is good, they can't be good in themselves. And so think about that. So all of these traits could be had, is what he's saying, by someone who is very bad, say a criminal, serial killer, you know, really bad criminal. You could have a criminal who is powerful, has riches, and even honor if they are able to convince everyone that they're good people. You could have a courageous murderer. You could have a resolute thief. You could have a very witty kind of criminal person. The thing is that the only thing that would make them good, the only thing that could really in itself be good, is a good will, is to choose the right thing to do. If you choose the wrong thing to do, if you choose to follow a rule that is not a morally good rule, you can still be a bad person. Now he says, an impartial, rational spectator can take no delight in seeing the uninterrupted prosperity of a being graced with no feature of a pure and good will, so that a good will seems to constitute the indispensable condition even of worthiness to be happy. Now, by impartial, rational spectator, he just means an imaginary sort of rational person watching on, right? If they're impartial, they're rational, then they're thinking, they have the ability to calculate and have logic. They are impartial, so they're not moving one way or the other as far as liking something or not liking something. They cannot be delighted if there is no part of a good will present. So in other words, so where he's coming from here is that his moral theory is based on reason. It's based on a logical deduction of what morality is. He thinks morality that is not based in reason is really not morality at all. If you had morality based on feelings, say feelings of pleasure and desire, he thinks those things just make us slaves, because those things are just things that happen to us as animals, that happen to us because of circumstances. It's only through our reason that we're able to make decisions that would take us and help us make decisions outside of our immediate circumstances. Okay. Okay, so goodwill is good, and it's good in itself. He says, okay, let's see, I'm looking for something here. Oh, here we go. Without the basic principles of a goodwill, they, meaning affects, passions, and self-control, can become extremely evil. Okay, so we talked about that. Okay, so next he moves in a logical direction, he believes, he wants to explain this concept of the will that is esteemed in itself and that is good apart from any further purpose, as it already dwells, he says, in natural sound understanding and needs not so much to be taught as only to be clarified. Now, this is an important point. We can call the morality that everyone gets without any knowledge or any thoughts about any highfalutin moral theories. We can call just the fact that we all learn lying is wrong and generally, and killing is wrong and things like that. Let's call that the common morality. Now, sometimes it's called the common morality. So common morality is just sort of everyday what's right and wrong. So Kant thinks that there are elements of the common morality that really tell us the same thing as what he's going to argue. He's going to argue that we should not make an exception of ourselves, that we should treat others in a way that would be consistent with how everyone else should be able to act. That we should only act in ways that we would be could logically promote for everyone to act. So this is a very common morality kind of principle, an everyday kind of principle. If Timmy goes up and kicks some sand onto Johnny, we run up to Timmy and say, hey, would you like it if Johnny did that to you? So it's a little bit like the golden rule. It's very similar to that, although the golden rule has some problems. The golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That works for the most part as a sort of rule of thumb. But certainly if somebody was a masochist and they enjoyed pain, and there are such people, then the golden rule wouldn't work the way that we would hope the golden rule would work, because people like that could easily go and cause other people pain. They wouldn't mind it because they like having pain caused to them. Undergoing pain for themselves. So what Kant is doing is he's working out something about the common morality that he thinks is very important, and it's this idea of duty. It's this idea of morality as only making sense if it's something that applies to everyone. By the way, that moral theories, I think one good way to think about moral theories is as the philosophers will think about morality, will be struck by the common morality and will pick out something that seems like a very important value or a very important principle or rule in common morality, and then build that into a theory and give it some rational grounding. So then he goes on and explains what it is to have duty and to do things for duty. Doing one's duty is so important, Kant thinks, that the only way that you can know that someone's moral is if they are doing something purely out of duty. Okay, if I'm doing the right thing, if I'm not charging people or if I'm not lying to people, but I'm doing it because I feel like it, then I'm not doing it out of duty. I'm not doing it strictly out of duty. To the extent that I act out of a principle that it's the right thing to do, then only to that extent does an act have moral worth. Kant gives us some examples here. Even suicide, he says, if someone doesn't commit suicide because they're afraid to die, or they don't commit suicide for some other self-serving reason, then, I mean, it's a good thing in a sense, but it's not a morally worthy thing. It's not particularly moral. It's only, Kant says, that it's only when somebody would really like to kill themselves, but they don't because it's the wrong thing to do, because they follow the moral law, and that's the only reason that they don't do it. That is when we know for sure that the act has moral worth. Kant goes through several examples with this, as I say. You know, an action has, okay, let's see, an action, let's see where I am here. Oh, here we go. All right. Proposition. Let's see here. Okay, sorry for taking time here. Okay, there's three propositions here. One is the idea that something has moral worth only if one is acting according to duty. The second proposition here is that an action done from duty only has its moral worth in the maxim in accordance with which it is decided upon. Now, a maxim is a rule. You can think of it as a personal rule. So, for instance, if I'm considering lying in order to get money, I turn that act itself in my mind into a maxim, into a little rule for myself. So I would say, whenever I need money, I will lie to get it. So that sort of generalizes my individual act. So that's what he means by turning it into a maxim. So that's what gives an action its moral worth. So he's just saying here that the moral worth of an act does not depend on the realization of the object of the action. He's just saying it doesn't depend on whether a person gets an object or not. It doesn't depend on the outcome of the action, but only on the principle of volition. That means willing, in accordance with which the action is done without regard for the object or the faculty or desire. It's a fancy way of just saying it's all about whether the maxim is good. And we're going to find out in a second what makes a maxim good, not with the outcome or consequences of an action. Okay. Third proposition, duty is the necessity of an action from respect for law. Okay. I cannot have respect for inclination. Now, when he says inclination here, he means emotions or desires. These are sort of the bodily things we sort of associate with the body, not with the mind. So there's reason and there's inclination is kind of where he goes back and forth. So I cannot have respect for inclination as such, like just as it is by itself, whether it is mine or another. I can at most approve of it. Okay. It says, hence, the mere law for itself can be an object of respect and so a command. So, only what is connected with my will merely as ground and never as effect. So only what is a reason to act for my will, and it can never be the effect of the action itself. What does not serve my emotions or inclinations, but outweighs it, at least excludes it altogether from calculations. The mere law can be, only the mere law can be an object of respect. Okay, but what kind of law can this be that must determine the will, even without regard for the effect expected of it? Okay, since I have deprived the will of every impulse that could arise for it from obeying some law, nothing is left but the conformity of actions as such with universal law, which alone is to serve the will as its principle. Okay. Now, what he's getting ready to say is that this is the sort of the concept of law as such, or the concept of law in general. And it really is not as hard of a concept as it is. He's kind of a difficult explainer, I'll admit that. But the idea of law as such, think about what law means, what a law is. A law tells people to do something, and the whole basic thing behind a law is that everyone has to do it. And you can't make an exception of yourself. In other words, no exceptions. If it's a law, everyone has to do it, right? So that is essentially what the first form of the categorical imperative is here. I ought never to act except in such a way that I could also will that my maxim should become a universal law. So you take my little general rule, my little maxim about lying. You know, should I lie in order to get money? Well, I turn it into a maxim and say, whenever it's convenient for me, I will lie to get money. Now, what if I turn that into a universal law so that everybody had to, whenever they wanted money, had to lie? So now we're living in a world, in this little thought experiment that Kant's creating, we're living in a world where everybody is lying. What would be the outcome of that? Now, we're not talking about the consequences to determine whether they would be good or not, so that the action would be good if it was good consequences. We're just making a logical point here. If my maxim of lying in order to get money were to be universalized and everyone had to do that, Kant says, logically speaking, the whole edifice of promise keeping would fall apart. The whole idea of lying would fall apart because liars depend on most people telling the truth in order to lie. So you can't lie if no one is going to believe you anyway. It just, lying becomes meaningless. It falls apart. So it contradicts itself. So if you have a maxim that is universalized, leading to a contradiction, either of my original act, so my original act falls apart because I can't do it now, because the practice just undermines my own ability to act in the way I was intending, or if the universalized maxim actually contradicts humanity in some way, then you can't do it. Then it would be an immoral act. So in a sort of short form, you can't make an exception of yourself. If you want to lie, if you can't have everyone do it, then you can't do it. If you want to steal, if everyone can't do it, then you can't do it. And the reason why you can't do it is because it wouldn't make sense if everyone were to do it. Okay. Okay, let's go forward here. And there's some examples here where, he talks about a lying promise, basically saying what I just said, but in a little more of a 19th century way. So you see, he says things like, see, I think that's, okay. I ask myself, would I indeed be content that my maxim should hold as a universal law? And could I indeed say to myself that everyone may make a false promise when he finds himself in a difficulty he can get out of in no other way? I soon become aware that I could indeed will the lie, but by no means a universal law to lie, for in accordance with such a law, there would properly be no promises at all. Right? And so the original act, his maxim, right, his little general rule, as soon as it were made a universal law, would destroy itself, would undermine itself. Okay, I'm going to spend a long time on this, so I'm going to shoot ahead a little bit. Let's see. Now, he calls a command, right? A command is called an imperative. He says a formula of a command is an imperative. There are two kinds of imperatives, right? There are two kinds of commands. that we would give ourselves. One is a hypothetical command, the other is a categorical command. The hypothetical command would be one where we say, if I want X, then and Y will get me X, then I will do Y. So we give ourselves a hypothetical command if we're in a situation where we want something and we have to do something in order to get it. So we will ourselves to do that thing that will get the thing, okay? A categorical imperative is one. Now, categorical here means across the board, so it means absolute, right? So hypothetical imperative, I mean, I've been calling it a command, I'm sorry. Hypothetical imperative is where you command yourself to do something in hypothetical situations. So if the situation arises, if the conditions are a certain way, then you do the thing. If not, then not. But a categorical imperative is one that holds in all situations. Okay, and that's what this whole section is about. He says there is one single categorical imperative, and it is this, and it's maybe a slightly different wording from the one we did before, but it's all about universalizing the maxim of my act. And I'm sort of saying it backwards, but act in accordance with the maxim through which you can at the same time will that it become a universal law. Okay. And so then he goes through 4 examples. This is very helpful. It's always nice to get examples from Kant because he can be very, can definitely be difficult to understand sometimes. So if someone is sick of life, has a series of troubles, they're on the point of despair, he may ask himself if he has a duty to take his own life or the contrary. His maxim is that from self-love, I make my principle to shorten my life. Now, what he means there is, you can think of it as from self-love in that, from the fact that it would make him feel better to commit suicide, or that, excuse me, that he's unhappy, he's feeling pain at living, and so he wants to end that pain by ending his life. So he asks if this could be a universal law of nature. So whenever a person is tired of life and wants to end it, then they should end it. But he says, it's seen at once that a nature whose law it would be to destroy life by means of the same feeling whose destination is to impel toward the furtherance of life would contradict itself. So by means of the same feeling, I think we can understand it to mean that we usually use the avoidance of pain in furthering our lives. So to use the avoidance of pain to end our lives is actually contradicting the whole idea of what that feeling is about in nature. Here's the one, number 2, about the lying promise. Number 3 is someone who thinks that they should allow their talents rust, or he says neglecting his natural gifts. He finds neglecting one's natural gifts would contradict what life gives us those gifts for. So it contradicts, universalizing that maxim would contradict the whole purpose of having natural gifts. And the first categorical imperative, the first form of the categorical imperative, which we're talking about now, would lead to a contradiction if somebody wanted to not help others who are in need. And there you have a situation where if you imagine that nobody helps other people, then each of us very possibly, very probably is going to need the help of others at some point. And so not helping others, we can't will that everybody do that because then other people wouldn't help us. And so remember that little heuristic there, that universalizing of the maxim is all about doing that as a thought experiment in the mind. This is not about like trying to achieve a world where everyone does the same thing as we do. it's saying that if we cannot do those things that we, it's saying that we cannot we cannot do those things. We cannot use our will to will ourselves to do those things that we would not have everyone do. Now there's a second form of the categorical imperative, and let me finish off with that. Okay, let's see here. 1, 2, 2. Okay, so what he says in here is that human beings are essentially rational and they want to be treated autonomously, where they can make their own decisions. They want to be treated with dignity. And so everyone should be treated that way. So rational nature, he says, exists as an end in itself. The human being necessarily represents his own existence in this way. Every other rational being also represents his existence in this way. So the practical imperative, and this is known as the second form of the categorical imperative, is so act that you use humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, always at the same time as an end. That's a purpose, as its own end, its own purpose. Always at the same time as its own end, never merely as a means. Okay, so we'll find that using someone as a means is using them instrumentally. Regarding someone as an end in themselves is valuing them intrinsically in themselves. So we're not to manipulate other people for our own purposes. So he goes through the same examples and shows how the second form of the categorical imperative works the same way, still comes out as the same things being right, same things being wrong. So suicide, turns out suicide violates the second categorical imperative because one is using oneself as a means to pleasure or the ending of pain, and one should not manipulate oneself that way. As regards to duty owed to others in making a false promise, if I'm lying to someone to get money, I am manipulating that person. I'm using them as a means merely. Let me show here that never merely as a means. We can use people as means, and we often do, to our ends, but the whole point is that we're never to use them merely as a means. So we're never to manipulate them in a way that they would not agree to, like holding information back from them. You'll know in healthcare contexts, the idea of informed consent is such a huge factor in healthcare contexts. That principle, so important, is a came directly from Kant's philosophy here. The whole idea of autonomy and you have to inform people. At one time, doctors, not all doctors, but a lot of doctors would be paternalistic if they thought the patient would be better off. If they didn't know the facts of their own case, then that's the way they would go. But in the 50s, especially the 60s and 70s, when people started to depend on machines to live longer, when we were able to extend people's lives with such things, questions about more, what do we owe? What are we morally obligated to do as far as patients go, clients or whatever you call them? Then things like informed consent came to be very important. So with respect to let's see, I think they're talking here about, okay, so we shouldn't use ourselves in terms of our not developing our natural gifts, and it could not be a principle for humanity if we do not help others. humanity might indeed subsist or exist if no one contributed to the happiness of others, but yet did not intentionally withdraw anything from it. But there is still only a negative and not a positive agreement with humanity. In other words, it's not consistent with the way humanity is as an end in itself, unless everyone also tries as far as he can to further the ends of others. For the ends of a subject who is an end in himself must also, as far as possible, be my ends. So in other words, Kant is here saying that we should be in a large way responsible for each other, that your ends, that is your purposes, your autonomous decisions should be just as important to me as mine should be to you. And if we all lived in this way, then Kant says in another place, then we'd be living in what he calls a kingdom of ends. A kingdom of ends for Kant is a world where everyone is living according to the categorical imperative. Everybody is treating everyone as an end in themselves, never merely as a means, and also according to the first form of the categorical imperative, where people act only on those maxims that they could will become universal laws of nature. Okay, I hope that this helped a little bit in your understanding of this very difficult but extremely influential article. Thank you for your time and attention.